Jim, what did you think of Dirty Harry?
Well, it's a great movie. It's a classic for a reason. It's described on the box as a neo-noir. I don't know necessarily how true that is. I'm also not even sure what a neo-noir is.
Can I say something about neo-noir? Again, this is a couple episodes ago with Mad Max. We talked about how my interpretation of the word dystopian is apparently different from how most people use it. I'm going to say something kind of similar about neo-noir, and I think this is just really, when I first heard about neo-noir, it was like Blade Runner, and maybe a few other kind of sci-fi movies, maybe Soylent Green a little bit. And so I thought neo-noir, because neo sounds like sci-fi. I mean, it just means new, obviously, but I thought neo-noir had to be sci-fi. And really, it's not. It's just modern.
Yes.
And so we could say neo-noir is just noir that's not in black and white, right? But then it's just like, is noir different than just film noir? Is film noir specifically as like a proper noun? Does that have to be black and white, and just like noir, neo-noir doesn't have to be? Because like I've seen John Wick described as neo-noir. I've seen Blue Velvet. Speaking of David Lynch, a lot of David Lynch stuff I feel like is neo-noir-ish.
Well, you know why
Minority Report was definitely one of the sci-fi movies that I had seen described as that.
Well, you know why I think something like John Wick is described as neo-noir? It's because of this movie, Dirty Harry, or the Dirty Harry franchise. Because Clint Eastwood well, first off, he's such a cool character, and that's what really propels this movie, is Clint Eastwood and his interactions with the world around him. But he is this awesome character to watch, and he's just so like grizzled and gruff, and he doesn't take any shit, and he gives too much shit.
Yeah.
You know? And he is, I guess, this noir-ish character. Right, he's
he is. He's a modern noir hero where he's like morally gray. There's a lot in a lot of the classic film noir from the 40s and 50s and stuff. There's a lot more of like a sexual component to those movies that isn't in Dirty Harry, and they couldn't go too into it in some of those old movies because they're old movies, obviously. Mm-hmm. But neo-noir usually, like, there's the femme fatale, obviously, or not neo-noir, but film noir, classic film noir. But the noir hero is just this kind of morally gray. A lot of times he doesn't seem to care that much about whatever case his is. It's more of a thing of duty. And in this case, I guess Harry cares a lot about catching Scorpio Killer, but does he care for the right reasons? Does he actually care about the 14-year-old girl, or does he just really want to kill this guy? Or does he, because he doesn't care about all the rules and regulations that govern policing and law enforcement, obviously, about that. So yeah, he is a hyper violent Sam Spade in some respects, I think.
And again, he's what propels this movie, and I think what makes this movie great. I don't know if this movie would be as good with another actor playing a different type of character. You know what I mean?
I don't know how well you know this, but there were a lot of different actors reportedly either interested or at least considered for this role. I'm going to list some of them. I think all of them are terrible, and maybe it's because we have Eastwood to measure up to, but like I can't imagine these other actors doing justice. But how about Frank Sinatra? Can you picture Frank Sinatra as Dirty Harry?
No, and by 71, absolutely. He's like fat.
Yeah,
old.
And that's the other thing. The age is a factor on most of these guys, because also John Wayne. And John Wayne was like, he had one foot in the tombstone in 71 almost, but like, I don't know. And John Wayne apparently, I think, was the first choice, and I think he turned it down because he felt it was too violent. He didn't like the R-rated aspects of the film, the aspects of the film that Clint Eastwood wouldn't mind, because that's what a lot of his movies were. They were just more modern and more violent John Wayne movies in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And then another one considered was Steve McQueen.
Overrated.
Which I think he would have been better than Wayne or Sinatra, but yeah, he would not have been my first choice. I think Eastwood is perfect. I think you could have gotten some other actors. You could have maybe gotten a Bronson. Bronson's a little older, obviously, or at least looks a lot older than Eastwood, but with the Death Wish movies coming a few years later, you can kind of see a similarity there. Like, yeah, maybe he could have done that, but any actor I don't think is doing a better job than Eastwood. It just, there might be some that would do it pretty well.
Yeah, and going back to the John Wayne thing, it's interesting that John Wayne was thought of for this role when he's like the family man.
John Wayne, well, and that's the thing though, because Eastwood and John Wayne are both politically conservative, because the character of Harry Callahan is politically very conservative. The difference is John Wayne was more social values conservative, I think, and Eastwood's probably more economically conservative, maybe. Like Eastwood, like imagine John Wayne in an R-rated movie. Imagine John Wayne saying the F word or peeping on a naked woman. Like, there's a reason we never saw it. Yeah. And it's not just because of his age.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he was still making movies in the 70s. He could have made a movie where he's just, fuck this, fuck that, all that stuff. And it's like, no, he don't want to do that. That wasn't who John Wayne was.
I think his character that he played that most closely resembles Dirty Harry would have been Rooster Cogburn, I guess.
Oh, yeah, he does say bitch. Fill your hands, you son of a bitch. That's probably as vulgar as John Wayne ever got.
I know, and I bet he had to go wash his mouth out with soap after he finished filming that scene.
Quite possibly.
Yeah, Dirty Harry, great movie, great acting, cool story, fun action, nothing over the top, but it's serviceable, and it is fun to watch. Yeah, great shots of San Francisco in the 70s, in the early 70s, which was kind of like a magical time that you kind of pointed out earlier. It was the transition out of the hippy-dippy era.
Well, and that's specifically the San Francisco thing. What I find fascinating about 70s urban movies in general is that the 70s was just the most filthy time in America's history, basically. And it's just where there's just porno theaters everywhere. It's the porno chic era. This is right around the time when porno movies were actually becoming mainstream. And it's like, yeah, sure, we'll just have peep shows on every street corner. It's a magical time. It's truly, I'm sure it was. I have such trouble believing that cities were like that. Like, not that long ago.
I know it's weird, right?
And I know they were. I've seen the footage. I've seen Basket Case. I've seen Taxi Driver. I just have, it's just hard to wrap my head around that, though.
Well, while you try to wrap your head around that, how about you tell me how you feel about Dirty Harry? Did you like it?
Sure, yeah. Well, I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies, really, of all time. I think Eastwood's awesome. I love him as an actor. I think, again, not the most complicated performance. Eastwood has certainly delivered better performances, more nuanced performances in his acting career. But the character is so much fun, and he embodies all of what makes Dirty Harry, what makes Harry Callahan fun to watch, and also there's like a love to hate him aspect to it, too.
Yes, yeah.
Like, I do think, I don't think this movie's necessarily a conservative movie. I think Callahan's definitely a super conservative hero, but I think the movie does ask questions about him. And I do love that, like, with how awesome Scorpio is as a killer, as a villain, it's, like, reasonable for someone to think, yeah, we actually do need Dirty Harrys out there.
Yes.
Because if we have people like Scorpio, how do we deal with that? I think the movie... I don't know if it's an intelligent movie. It's certainly not a dumb movie, but I do think it's like worth asking questions like that. Certainly when you're watching a movie like this, and also just to hit upon the politics of this movie a bit. So this movie is, I think I mentioned it already, but directed by Don Siegel. Don Siegel, one of the two directors that Eastwood credits for why he is such a good director, or like why he went into directing. He's like, I felt like I knew everything I needed to know about directing from working with Don Siegel and Sergio Leone, because they're two of the greatest directors ever, especially Leone. I think Siegel probably a little underrated historically, not that he should be brought up necessarily with like Kubrick and Scorsese, but man, was a great director. Worked with John Wayne also. I think he did The Shootist, which is John Wayne's last movie, I believe, and one of his better ones, I would say. He also did Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original from the 50s, which is an awesome movie as well. But supposedly, Don Siegel was super politically liberal, and I had read something like his two biggest movies, or his two most memorable movies, were these movies that were seen by so many people to be conservative movies. Dirty Harry and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. With Invasion of the Body Snatchers, how it deals with kind of the Red Scare and stuff like that. So the argument that this person was saying was basically that Don Siegel films were misinterpreted. That may or may not be true. I think, I just think this movie's good at raising some questions. I don't think it's glorifying what Harry Callahan does. I don't think it's necessarily, he's not the villain the way Scorpio is, certainly. But yeah, I don't know. You can read Dirty Harry from either side of the political aisle, I think. And that doesn't necessarily make it worse. I think that almost makes it better in some ways, that there's layers to it.
Yeah, I agree. At the end of the day, what he stands for is left up to the specific audience members watching the movie.
Well, what he stands for, what Callahan stands for is clear. What the movie is saying about that, I think, is up to the audience.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, Callahan is one of the least mysterious film characters I think I can think of. He's very blunt. We know exactly his deal. Even the little things are left mysterious about his wife and stuff. But no, we know who Harry Callahan is, what he stands for. But it's a magical film despite all that. I think I've always said this, action as a genre changed drastically in like the 80s. You know, when you get your James Camerons and, you know, Die Hard and all that stuff, it's a lot more energetic. It's a lot faster paced. I don't know what started that, but I do know you see older action movies, and you're like, oh, this is barely an action movie by today's standards. Like, I think Dirty Harry falls into that. Death Wish does. And I think James Bond from Goldfinger on was pretty modern in its action sensibilities, but I think Dirty Harry is probably my favorite of those like pre-80s. Like, it's my favorite of like those slow, for lack of a better term, boring action movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and it's where the action isn't about the speed, the energy. It's more just about the brutality. I don't know if this will make sense, but one shot from Dirty Harry's .44 Magnum feels like 45 shots fired from Arnold's, you know, helicopter gun in Predator or whatever, that gun I'm talking about. It's like kind of like a Gatling gun type thing. I feel like you feel the impact of every single bullet fired in this movie that, you know, you don't always in some of the more action-packed movies out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to explain it. Yeah, I agree.